Tina Kothari, thank you so much for joining me on What Makes You Tick. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. And thank you for asking me.
It's great to have you on board. Tina, I think should be good to note at the start that there's a bit of continuity between season 1 and season 2, and that my sister, who is my first guest in season 1, mentions you wholeheartedly and with a lot of positive comments, and very warmly shares what your influence has been on her in her career, not only as a mentor and a life coach, but also as and now a friend. And I thought from that conversation, I think I reached out to you pretty shortly afterwards, and I was like, Tina, would you like to join What Makes You Tick? And thankfully, between the jigs and the reels, after the last length of time, we've got the opportunity to sit down. So thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
The conversation, obviously, What Makes You Tick is all about what motivates people, what drives people, and I love to learn from others, as I've kind of alluded to before. I'd love to start with your maybe journey and your career, because it's quite interesting and it's quite inspiring in that where you've come from in terms of being born in India and then moving to the UK, and then finding a way to become a director in different companies at age 26, and then to focus your time the last 20 odd years in people development. I think it's an incredible journey. And now what you're doing with AnotherWay Now is remarkable. So maybe it would be good to start from there and maybe summarize where your path has brought you.
Okay. So I went to a very posh girls' school. I had to wear a hat and travel on the tube, and our skirts had to be a certain length, and we used to have to kneel down and have it measured from the floor up. And of course, you know, I'm an Indian, and we had a pretty Indian household, and my school was very white, very English, and there was kind of schizophrenia, I think, that existed at that time between the two different cultures. And little did I know then how that would stand me in good stead, because the ability really to adjust to such different worlds has made it possible for me to do a whole variety of different things in different ways, and, you know, add to my portfolio of experiences. And I feel very grateful and very lucky, although it wasn't always easy at the time. And then I went to university in York and studied philosophy, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, I loved being there and being, you know, with lots of people and partying and all of that kind of stuff. But I also loved my course. And again, you know, it's never left me. The things that I learned there about people and thinking and certainty and knowledge and, you know, how to construct an argument, all again, you know, fed into my portfolio of experiences. So I came out of university with pretty average results, but pretty prime experiences. And then spent a year on a special temporary employment project on the Isle of Dogs, which is not at that time was a really pretty rundown, quite rough part of London. Yeah. So then I did an education project. We ran a mobile book shop. We did an oral history project, and we taught literacy to adults. And it was really hard work, but I loved it, and it was very different. And again, it was a very different life. You know, I come from a well-to-do Indian family, and here I am mixing with really, you know, with people who are stuck in poverty, really, living in horrible conditions. And it was, again, another eye-opener for me. I think the most shocking thing for me was one day when I went to someone's house. It was her flat. She was telling me about the history of the Isle of Dogs. It was part of the oral history project. And she offered me a cup of tea, but said it would have to be black because she didn't have milk. So I said, well, shall I go and get some milk? And she said, no, I can't get milk until Friday because that's when I get my money. Oh, wow. And I had never experienced or understood that there is that kind of lack of access to money. I mean, you know, I've got a wallet full of cards and I can always borrow something off someone or take it out of a hole in the wall. There weren't holes in the wall at the time, but I just never experienced what it was like to have nothing at all, and to be without milk, you know, for 2 days, because it was a Wednesday. It was, again, another eye opener. And I think that I'm just piling in the things that made things different. So my project ended, and then I went to work at a confirming house, which is a bit like banking and a bit like a shipping company, an import-export company. And I started at the bottom. You know, I was making teas and coffees. At that time, we had telexes. So I used to send and receive telexes. I tried to teach myself to read these telexes with the dots on the fingers, a bit like Braille, with varying success. And then it was just sticking with it, and being incredibly nosy, listening into other people's phone calls, watching what they were doing, looking over their shoulders, and learning bit by bit, you know, what a good bill of lading looks like, or how to organize a back-to-back letter of credit. You know, what happens if you're dealing with Nigeria and there's an 18-month pipeline in foreign currency, and how do you cover that off so that no one loses any money? And I learned, and I really did learn, and managed to crawl up and start doing the bookkeeping, and then went with the boss to negotiating with banks to get facilities. And, you know, I learned a lot, and I learned it fast. And then, you know, life just threw me, well, it's not a curved ball, it was an opportunity. The big boss had gone abroad, and he'd had a heart attack while he was abroad. And he phoned the office, and we were a holding company for about 15 different companies. And he called the office and he said, well, Tina, you can be director of XYZ. So it was 3 or 4 of those companies, just in order that I could, you know, authorize things, that I could negotiate things, that I could check the bills of lading, that I could, you know, do all the things that one needs to do, but that I had the authority to do that. So it wasn't as though I was like a high flyer with shiny shoes and a good suit, because I really wasn't. It was just chance, and it was a huge responsibility. And I was frightened, I have to say. But my dad also, he's very smart, and he, you know, he's a financial consultant and really successful. He's died now, but he really helped me, you know. And I would go home and I'd say, I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z, and he taught me through it, and I learned, and I learned fast, and I loved that. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I got married, and then got pregnant, and then things got choppy for me in my life, because I had my first child was stillborn, then I had 2 live children, then I had another stillborn baby, and then I had another child. So I had 5 pregnancies in something like 6 years. It was really intense. Wow. And I didn't work in that time at all. I stayed at home. I was at home for 10 years until my youngest went to school, and was living in Lewisham at the time. And, you know, it wasn't easy. I didn't like staying at home all the time. And in a way, I think I was like a child bringing up children. You know, I'd never had that degree of responsibility for children. I didn't even know how to hold a baby. So that was difficult. We then made some friends. We moved from Lewisham to Croydon and made some friends, some very, very good friends, who we're still really good friends now, who had matching children. Okay. So, you know, the ages of mine matched the ages of theirs. And they're all still friends, you know, and they're now also having babies. So I'm watching all of this stuff growing. So we then moved up to Sheffield. So lots of movement, and you can see they're all such different places: Lewisham, Croydon, Sheffield. And in Sheffield, I took a counselling course, and absolutely loved it. So I trained as a counsellor. I worked then in a rehab in Rotherham, which was mainly male, all white, lots of ex-miners, rough drunks. And they used to call me the Ponzi Indian Git. And because I would drive up in my bright red Vectra, which, you know, obviously it's not a brilliant car. It's not a Mercedes, but it was Ponzi, you know, for them. And I'd turn up with my English accent and my red car, and but I fitted in ultimately. It took a while, but I did fit in ultimately. And I saw some shocking things. You know, I witnessed a man biting another man's ear off. A girl coming in who has been beaten up really badly. You know, and some of the stories were really horrifying. And again, I had the experience that I'd had when I was working on the Isle of Dogs. So I'd gone from, you know, this very comfortable lifestyle into something so different. And again, you know, it's just, actually it's talking to you that's making me realize quite how schizophrenic my life was. I don't know if schizophrenic's the right way to say it, but how it was made up of such opposing experiences and forces. Is this too much detail?
No, this is fantastic. This is exactly it. I think just keep going, just keep sharing, because I think what's so interesting, what I'm getting out of this, is that you were thrown into the deep end in certain aspects in different stages of your life, and you found a way to swim, and you've used what you've learned to help reinforce what you can do for others as you've gone along. So please keep going. Yeah.
Well, I stayed on at once I'd done my internship, I had to get in something like 320 hours of work before I could get my certificate. Once I'd finished those 320 hours, I then asked for a salary and got one. And I continued to work at the rehab. And by that time, I'd really found my feet and I'd got a rhythm. And I was doing a weekend course in Neuro-Linguistics in York. So I headed back to York every week, one weekend every month. So it's really weird, you know, wow, these loops. And I loved it. And so I did the practitioners, I did the master practitioners, and then I went to the States and did the trainers training. And it was in a place called Lancaster, Pennsylvania, not far from where Rona is now. And that was bizarre as well. So we were staying in this hotel, and, you know, it was very nice, had good food, you know, lovely. The hotel itself was lovely, but you come out of the hotel and there was poverty again. So it's just like so weird, just so strange.
Jekyll and Hyde of a world, yeah.
And living in London as I do now, sorry, just to jump for a second, I see it all the time. You know, I live in King's Cross, which is pretty fancy now, but all I have to do is cross York Way, which is like less than 10-minute walk, and I'm in another part of London. And that's how cities work, don't they? They butt up, but you live on your own little planet within it. Anyway, I did my trainer's training, and I failed in the assessment at the end. And I went to the trainer, the teacher, and just said, look, I've come all the way from the UK. I've spent this much money to be here. Give me another chance. It was a presentation that had to be made about language patterns. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you 12 hours. I think it was 12 hours or an overnight anyway, to go and learn it. All night I sat up and learned this stuff, put together my presentation, did it, got my certificate, and came back to the UK. And now that I got my trainer's training, something different started to happen. I got called out to other rehabs, so like priory hospitals and mental institutions and detox units and needle exchanges, to train therapists or counsellors in a particular model for working with addictions or eating disorders, dissociative disorders of all sorts. And I really enjoyed myself. And by now I'm living in Sheffield. Most of my work is actually in London. So I'm up and down the motorway, really exhausted, but really, really having a ball. And decide at some point to set up a business. And that was my first business, Hexagon Training Company. And I ran programs for people in Neuro-Linguistics, really, in hotels in Sheffield, and ran programs in councils. I ran programs in businesses. I got the contract to work with Virgin. Well, they weren't Virgin then, they were called Telewest, Telewest then became Telewest NTL, Telewest NTL then became, and then Virgin Media. And that got me into working with, of course, telecoms people. And around this time, a number of other things happened. I got a contract with the government of Croatia to go and work with their health workers and teachers and counsellors to, because they were dealing with war trauma and they were dealing with addiction. So I worked at a needle exchange in Split, and then a motley crew that all came, and I ran a program once a month. Mm-hmm. And it was hilarious. You'd love this because the war had ended just 2 years beforehand, and they say, you know, with war comes guns and drugs. And there was a really serious drug problem. And I did work with this needle exchange called Help in Split. And the two things that they couldn't get were needles, you know, so they were using old needles and condoms. Okay. And lovely. So me and my kids, in the month before, we would drive round and collect needles from old people's, out-of-date needles from old people's homes, and condoms from hospitals. Old people's homes, yes. Here you are, the original geriatric condom. And at that time, and I would have them in black sacks in the basement of our house. And then when the month was, you know, when it was time to go, I'd put them in a big box. And at that time, there was an airport at Sheffield, and that's a whole other story. But there was an airport at Sheffield, but the runway was so short that the furthest it could go was Schiphol. Then I'd have to change flights. Okay. But it was great. I mean, I could almost sneeze in my bed and end up in the plane because it's so near. Yeah. And like ridiculous. It was like it's like a small warehouse. It was smaller than the smallest IKEA. Do you know what I mean? It was tiny, and it was long, and it had a wall going down the middle. Yeah. And one side was town side, and the other side was air side. And you passed your bag through a hole, and you saw a hand come out and take the bag. And it's just like, there wasn't any rolling ramp.
What's the password?
Oh, it's so funny. And you arrive, and I arrived, and there's the cafe, and the cafe is a U shape. So half of the U is on the city side, and the other half is on the air side. So I would get my hot chocolate on the house side, on the city side, and the flight was at some god o'clock in the morning, because I remember going there when it was dark so often. And I'd have my hot chocolate. Then I'd go airside, and I'd still have to wait. So I'd ask for a hot chocolate. And they said, "Oh, we don't do hot chocolate." I said, you just served me round there with hot chocolate. Oh, no, we don't do hot chocolate on this side, hot chocolate on that side. I think, what?
Yeah,
this bizarre. Is the most bizarre. But here's the thing. Obviously, they got to know me really well. And they called me the party girl, because they would open my box, and in it was just like needles and condoms. Wow. You know, she's going partying, you know, with 400 needles and 2,000 condoms.
And how long were you over and back to Split for?
I did Croatia for 3.5 years. Okay. And it was really, really, in the end, I handed over to somebody else, because I went up to a place called Vukovar, which was absolutely destroyed. It was it's the top of Croatia. It held the war back for 3 years. They fought, but the Serbs and the Croats were living side by side, but they turned into enemies overnight. And I worked with a team headed up by a man that we called Freud, because he always said to me, "What would Freud say?" I really don't give a shit what Freud would say. It's really about what you're dealing with. But this guy, you know, Dr. Skocic, I think his name was, he said he woke up on one morning, went to his ward, and the whole ward was dead. They'd just been shot in their beds.
Oh.
And there were these as you drive into Vukovar, I mean, I remember being, the woman who hosted me, she was some mental health chief with Vrapcha, which is a mental hospital in Zagreb. And she hosted me for most of the places. And she drove this ridiculous car, which, you know, I think when it reversed, I think the speedometer went backwards as well. She smoked non-stop. She was probably about 60 at the time. She was crazy. She always tried not to pay me. And, but she was a mover and shaker, you know, she'd obviously got stuff. And we did this long drive from Zagreb up to Vukovar, and stopped at Jakovar, I think. I can't remember what it was called, where we met some bishop, somebody, you know, a holy man in a dress. And there were holes in the wall of the church where the gunshots, you know, where the guns had hit it. And then we got to Vukovar, and I tell you, it's like something out of a movie, because the buildings, as we approached, were like ripped apart. You know, they had no roofs, or the staircases were hanging out the windows.
Yeah.
There was grass growing up through the middle of buildings. You get into Vukovar, and the pavements, I mean, it was really bizarre. Like, the pavements were all disrupted. They were all chucked up.
Yeah.
They had a sports stadium, which the top floor had tipped down. And then they had the cafe. And I mean, there's something quite Italian, I think, about the Croats. They're so close to Italy anyway.
Yeah.
And they've got a real coffee culture. They love their coffee, they love their cigarettes, and they love their shots of alcohol as well. And this cafe that we went to had tin tables, like, you know, horrible tin tables. And they painted this higgledy-piggledy pavement green to make it look like it was grass. And then we sat there looking at this weird scene, you know, with this dilapidated old sports center, and drinking disgusting coffee. I mean, it was coffee like syrup.
Yeah.
And that got to me. And we went to Central Square, and that's where the market was. And there were trestle tables everywhere. And like, you know, you must know what a thriving market looks like. There's lots of hubbub and people and laden tables. Well, it wasn't like that.
Okay.
It wasn't. There must have been 5 people there. And they had like buckets of cheese in water, like you'd see mozzarella in a packet. It was some cheese that was in a liquid. And then you just have like 16 tomatoes. And it was bizarre and very, very eerie and quite silent and upsetting. And I came back from that, and I remember landing back in Sheffield, and I was really, really upset, and going home and calling my husband and saying, please come home. I don't think I can do this anymore. And, you know, I felt like the children weren't safe. I felt like the world wasn't safe, like it wasn't dependable. And I turned from this maverick hat wearing woman into really quite a fearful person. And it's just not good enough. You can't teach from that position. You can't train from that position. You can't help anyone from that position. And I had to finish my contract, and I didn't actually. I left, I can't remember how many modules there were, but I left 3 modules and found someone else to deliver them. And of course, it was an opportunity for another trainer to do something, you know, as prestigious as that.
Yeah.
And then came back to the UK. By now, I was giving seminars I did one in Denmark, and I did one in Norway, and I did some in New York and New Jersey, and began to get a name, not like a huge big name, like everybody would know me, nothing like that at all, but enough people knew something, and then the work began to come in from other places. So
and those seminars that you were doing, what were they based on? Were they based on the learnings that you'd experienced over the previous number of years, or were they bespoke to the different areas that you were going in?
So a seminar that I ran, that I would run in an organization like Sky or Telewest or wherever, that would be bespoke. So a bit like Rona would say to me, I need a team build, or I want some leadership stuff going with my team, or I've got this problem with the group that I'm working with. Can you put something together? Then I would put something together, I put a team together, and we deliver something that served the issue that they were talking about.
Okay.
But the seminars that I ran in places at conferences were on two things. One is working with addictions, and the other one was cybernetics, systems theory, how organizations work. So I never had a written script, but I knew what I was talking about, and I really enjoyed question and answer type things, so that I got better at when I had a chance to chat with someone.
Yes.
But I learned a lot as well. I went to seminars on cults. That was the one that struck me the most, the seminar on cults. And I went to seminars on how the eye and the brain work together, and how you can understand things about people by seeing how that operates. And I just didn't stop learning. And same when I was working within organizations, I learned about organizations and how they worked. And the beauty for me was, I've always had a bunch of people who have been my, they've been on my side. And I mean, Rona's definitely one. There's a particular man called Tony Grace, who was at the first corporate training that I ran, which was for the top team at Telewest. And we ran it for 10 days at a hotel in Guildford. And from that day, he has always been a supporter of mine. He's always helped me. That he was ill for a while, and by that time we'd become really, really good friends. And actually, what's interesting is, I knew him when his children were being born, or very little, and now his daughter is a trustee on the board of my charity.
Oh wow!
And it's just like amazing. Yeah, no, I love it.
That's incredible. That's incredible, yeah. And just so people are clear, Telewest was the original Virgin. Obviously that eventually became Virgin, but that's gone now. Yeah, that's incredible. And I suppose that tells people, I think, is that when you find somebody who's a good person, or that has something to offer life, and is a positive, optimistic person, and can kind of give you energy, you then tend to, like a fly around a light, you tend to just gravitate towards them and stay with them, don't you? Because there's a lot of people that I know from my own conversations with people, is that they spend so much time on the toxic or the negative things in their life and trying to figure them out, instead of trying to separate themselves from that toxicity and focus their time, efforts, and energy on the people who want it, and also the things that actually that lift them. And I think from listening to you there about that, Tom Grace, is that his name?
Tony Grace.
Tony Grace.
He'll love that I've mentioned him. I'll have to give him this.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
The link to this.
It kind of seems that Tony was your light in a way, and kind of that you gravitated around and managed to stay with and stick with then for the rest of his days, as they say. So I think that's amazing.
I think it's hard for someone like me. I don't trust easily. Doesn't mean I mistrust, but I don't trust easily. I don't give it all to one person. But he was someone who I did trust. It took a while to build, but I did and do trust him. And in fact, yeah, sorry.
What do you say to people who? So I was listening to Matthew McConaughey, who was talking about trusting people straight away, and that his theory is that I trust you straight away until you break that. So there's no reason for me not to trust you until you give me a reason. Whereas by the sounds of it, you're a little bit more cautious about giving that trust to people. So what do you think of the kind of the approach of saying, listen, I trust everybody until they break it? What do you think of that as a kind of like a strategy or a way of working?
I think two things. I think the first thing is, what does it mean to trust? And I think when you trust someone, it's conditional. What you're saying is, I know that I have a list of things in my head about what trust means. You're like, you won't talk about me behind my back. You'll look out for my best interests. But there's a whole bunch of stuff. So there are criteria that I need to satisfy. It's not that I don't trust, but it's not that I do trust. I don't do either.
Okay.
So I just learn I learn about the person, and I position myself close or further away accordingly. But it also doesn't mean that I'm right.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't mean that they're wrong if my trust is broken. It just means that I lay down too many conditions, and at the end of the day, they've got to think for themselves. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm overcomplicating it, but
it's kind of like my brother-in-law would say to me, is like, when you have expectations of people, then you're only going to get let down. And his thing is, have no expectations. You can't be upset by things. And I think when it comes to trust isn't just another kind of a way of labeling an expectation on somebody. And where sometimes expectations are hard to live up to because people put such a criteria on them. But again, I think it's more of a protecting thing. It's more to protect yourself from any hurt or conflict or whatnot, you know. I think that's kind of something that I think where trust plays a part. To know that somebody has your back when you're not in the room, it's like, that's, I think, the biggest compliment anybody could have with somebody, you know. And but I like both approaches. I just like you, it's learning and it's trying to figure things out, and that's it. If you gravitate towards somebody more and you enjoy them more, you're going to start trusting them more, because they'll get onto your skin a little bit more, you know. So let's move on slightly.
Okay.
So you have, what I love about your story so far is that it's like the United Colors of Benetton in terms of life. It has all these different things that are happening in your life that you've learned from really tricky and difficult situations. From going to Croatia, you worked across the Lebanon as well, didn't you? Did you deal over there at one stage?
No, I didn't.
But
I work in Dubai.
Dubai, yeah. But your story about Croatia kind of reminded me when I was over in the Lebanon, over with my uncle or my cousin, who is the head liaison officer between the Hezbollah, or sorry, the Lebanese army, the Syrians, and the Israelis, and it was just incredible. But that whole world is so different to the world that we live in, and like in a hop, skip, and a jump, you're there, and it's like you're in a different planet. But what I love about it is that your whole experience has kind of led you to a point where now you're working with, or you're the founding director of AnotherWay Now. And what I love about this, and I can see the connection, is that the mission there is to shine a spotlight on human rights issues. And what you experienced, I suppose, in Croatia potentially could have been that catalyst, because you saw such degradation in terms of the way people were treated in the land and all that stuff. But could you maybe explain a little bit of why you decided to create this business, and I suppose what you've learned most since its inception?
So by now, Hexagon has come to an end, and AnotherWay Associates has started. And I partnered up with that family that I told you about that have got matching children. And one of the matching children also came and worked with me and Phil. So Etty, her name is, and Phil, my friend, and that was her dad, and me. We set up AnotherWay, and AnotherWay is Phil's creation. I think it's such a great name. That was the corporate thing. Okay. Then one day Etty comes down in the morning, and she says, you know, with the number of people that you know that are so interesting, you've got interesting stories to tell, why don't we begin to run some seminars and stuff? So we did, and AnotherWay Now was born. So AnotherWay Now has never generated funds. Everything is done for free. And in the middle of all of that, I went to Tribeca Film Festival with a documentary making company, a man called Johnny Webb, who, again, you know, I've known for years and have worked with him, you know, for years, a bit like Tony Grace. And there were 3 films about the death penalty that were shown there, and they were so shocking and so disturbing. And yet I learned so much from them that that's when we turned the corner, really, and started, began to wind down the corporate arm. Phil went his way, I went my way, and we started looking for documentaries. And once we found 1 or 2, so we showed the death penalty films at BAFTA. We had 250, 300 people there. We called a man who had been on death row for 29 years. We called him over to the UK to talk about his experiences. His name's Ray Hinton. He had a series on Radio 4 recently. He is an extraordinary man. And then I just got the bug, and someone sent us a film about people trafficking into circuses in Nepal. And then we had an Afghani girl who had 2 children by her father, was raped regularly by him. She took him to court and had him found guilty. And she's not living in Afghanistan anymore. We're about to show another film called The Girl from Mogadishu, which is pretty self-apparent. I mean, one of the things that we've got very involved with is FGM or FGC, female genital mutilation or female genital cutting. And we set it up as a charity now, and we went into partnership, I don't know how else to describe it really, with Everyman Cinemas, which is a chain of cinemas that are really cool and funky around the UK. And we love them, and they have been amazing to us and have just said, look, whatever you're doing, we'll show your films in our cinemas. And that's really what's happened. And their cinemas like sofas and blankets and cushions, and you get hummus and tortillas served at your seat. And then at the same time, we put together a panel, consisting of a filmmaker, an activist, or someone who's a victim of whatever it is that we're talking about. And by now the team has changed. So it's me and Ella, my daughter. Etty trained as a teacher and went and is now a teacher and is pregnant and about to have her baby. And Ella lives in Manchester with her husband Dylan, and she runs AnotherWay Now together with a woman called Denise, who worked with Virgin Media and with Johnny Webb. So it's all quite incestuous, but it's all wrapping around quite nicely now. And now that we've started showing films, people send us films. So what do you think of this? Have you seen this on the telly? Or we've set up as a charity, which is actually, after I'm speaking to you today, I'm speaking to the lawyer that's setting us up as a charity. Okay. We've got 3 trustees. One is Johnny Webb, the man that I'm talking about, because he's a filmmaker and he knows all about documentaries and he's got great contacts within that world. The other one's Vicky Grace, Tony Grace's daughter, who is a fundraiser for the Royal Court Theatre Company, and she's done fundraising and marketing, and she's just got a perfect skill set. And the third person is a woman called Maya Foe. And you could do with talking to each of these people, because they are amazing people. I'd
love to. Yeah, I'd love to. If you can make the connection, I'd 100% love to reach these people. Because
Definitely. Yeah. Well, Maya Foe is amazing. She's the same age as my son. So she's like early 30s, mid 30s. And she works for Reprieve, which is an arm of Amnesty International, which is engaged with death penalty. Yeah. And she has pretty single-handedly managed to persuade pharmaceutical companies to not provide execution drugs. I don't know how else to describe it. And she's a human rights lawyer. So we've got the perfect trilogy there. We've got a documentary maker, a fundraiser, and a human rights lawyer. And we're on a roll. We're really on a roll. We've got a collaboration coming up with Reading University as a result of COVID and lockdown and whatever. We're doing things virtually instead of in cinemas. And so we're working with the law faculty at Reading University, showing a film, putting a panel together, having a conversation around the issues. We've got The Girl from Mogadishu is also going to be, that's AnotherWay Now. That's us doing our thing. And that's going to be shown in February on International Day of the Girl. Okay. And these films are extraordinary. I meet amazing people. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me from this, from setting this up, what have you learned most from creating this charity? Because you're dealing with such issues that are just mind-boggling. And I remember when I was doing a bit of research on what you do, one of the comments, and I'm paraphrasing now, so forgive me, but one of the things was to bring to life truths in other worlds to people who don't even realize what's happening. And I think you said something along those lines. And I thought that was really something to hit home, because you mentioned earlier Sheffield in one side of the town was doing hot chocolates and the other side wasn't, all right? And even in London, you cross the road and there's a completely different world. And that's one thing that I'm noticing, is that for us in, I suppose, a privileged setup, in that we have a house on over our heads, we have heat, we have water, we have clean food, we have all these things that we take for granted. And we go about our everyday and we live our lives, and we're kind of oblivious to what is actually happening in other aspects, in other areas of the world. What you're doing is shining a light in that. And I think, I suppose, yes, sorry, back to my question is, what are the things that you've learned most since creating this and finding out all these different stories?
I think exactly what you're saying. It's what's happening elsewhere, out of my vision and out of my experience. And it humbles me. And I really live an exquisitely privileged life. You know, I've got a car in the garage, I've got this beautiful flat here, I've got a house in France. You know, I never run out of milk. And I'm grateful. I'm really grateful. I just happen to have been lucky enough to be born in the right place.
Yeah. Living here in Ireland as well, there's a lot to be said for being in a neutral country and not have to deal with war, even though there's been we've have a history of war internally, and the troubles that have happened in Ireland in the last century. But I think there's a generation growing up that have never experienced that, which I think are very, very lucky. And I think just this leads kind of on to my next point in that, or question, in that 2021, there's a sense of uncertainty. And with the year that we've put down in terms of the lockdown and COVID and people dealing with it, it's created a hell of a lot of worry and a hell of a lot of anxiety that's now kind of consumed a lot of people. Some people are scared to literally go out the door because of the difference, because of their setup. I suppose while we've seen struggle and anxiety building, there's also been a lot of positivity. There's been a lot of optimism. There's been a lot of creativity in areas that you'd never have seen creativity before. And I think as a whole group of, as a whole people, we've been all forced to do this, to react to one thing at the same time. Where before it would have taken businesses years and years and years to digitalize themselves and transform, where now they've had to all focus on that kind of one thing to succeed and to survive. How are you approaching the future, and what advice would you give those who are pretty concerned and pretty worried at the moment?
There's two parts to that question. The first is, it's been like a sine curve of anxiety. You know, as you witness people getting ill or dying, then that, you know, it comes home to you. We've had family die in India, particularly, where it seems to have been quite strong, and that the anxiety rises. But then there's also the stuff that is like, it's such a privilege. It's such a wonderful thing to have the time to just sit and think. And I've connected with people like my old school friends, that just because I've got the time and I can Zoom, and I talk to people in Westport, and I talk to people in Dubai, and it's like, and I don't have to go anywhere. I'm finding it hard to spend money as well, because my daughter she works with Refugee Council of Australia. She's based in Melbourne. She has a son who's 3, who speaks 3 languages, which is amazing. And she's pregnant with her second child. And I used to go to Australia 2 or 3 times a year, and I can't. And I won't see that new baby for another year, and that's hard. My son's in Washington, he's a journalist, and he's just had his second child, a girl called Ada, and I've never seen Ada, and those are the things that bother me about lockdown. I get to see Ella because she works with me, and we make an effort. And in fact, I did lockdown with her for a few months earlier in the year. So I think the anxiety comes and goes. And I think it is a place of creativity. How do I plan for the future? Well, I've grown into someone who's much more comfortable sitting with uncertainty. I used to have, I mean, people would say this about me. It's like, I can't just say, let's meet soon. I have to go, what time, where, when, how, what you're going to wear, what we're going to eat, all of those things. And it's kind of like people feel pinned to the board by the amount of planning I have to do. And now I'm just going, God, I don't know. Will I see you in 2021? Don't know. And I quite like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's taken me 62 years to let go.
As you say, you're never too old to stop learning.
Yeah.
It's interesting how you say that, isn't it? Because that uncertainty is, if you welcome uncertainty, then you necessarily lose that anxiousness, or you kind of let the shackles off a little bit and just kind of go, what will be, kind of que sera, sera. You know, it's that type of approach, because we, like, my dad was sick with COVID earlier in the year, and he was up and down, and we nearly lost him. And like, it was pretty crazy, all right, that time. And what I've learned is, like, I'm appreciating that time now more so, because Rona's away, and obviously she was supposed to be aiming to be back, but she can't be back. So it's tough for her and Ian over there. But it's also a case of, with technology, we're able to stick together and we're able to communicate and do all that. And as Rona would say, it is what it is. Suck it up. It is what it is. Now let's go. Let's go, you know? So I kind of like that. I think if you nearly embrace the uncertainty and just like, take care of yourself, but don't get too over anxious about the things that you would have normally done. Let things happen, and they'll fall in whatever way they're supposed to fall. And control the controllables, right? You can't worry about the things that are outside of your control. Just look after yourself, stay clean, healthy, and all that stuff, and you'll be fine, you know? Yeah. I think it leads on then to, with your 25 years or 26 years, is it, in people development, as you would say? What is the greatest lesson you've taken from those years?
Twofold. I can only do my best, and I'm not responsible. So I'm not in charge of what happens. And I'm a facilitator, not a changer. I need to remember that. But the second thing is also, people can change, and they do change. My dad would say, you know, leopard doesn't change its spots, or whatever that phrase is.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember him at the age of 40 saying to me and my sisters, I'll not change now. I am who I am. I've been like this for decades, and I'll be like this till the end of my life. And we believed that. But every experience I have had has shown me that that's not true.
Okay. And
that's, for me, that gives me hope, because it means I can change too. And I have. Yeah. You know, this whole thing about letting go. Yeah, that's it. And I learned something from everyone. Honestly, I really do. That's not just a platitude. Think about working with Rona and witnessing, you know, where she was when we first met and where she is right now. It's just inspiring. And I like that too. So I'm in it. I've got skin in the game, the work that I do.
Yeah, I love that. And you're dead right. Like, Rona would say that she had this self-sabotage mentality and not believe in herself, and she would catastrophize things, and the voices in her head. And she speaks all about this in episode 1. But I think what that kind of showcases is that even with all those internal conflictions, you can learn to control and manage them, but then also you can soar and you can become as successful as you want to be, or realize whatever ambition that you have. And I think that's a great trait, but also it requires people like you, as you say, a facilitator or somebody to nearly bring that out in you. You know, sometimes people can't do it on their own. And I think it's so important to have the courage and the bravery to ask for help. And I think sometimes people forget to do that because they're proud or for whatever reason. Because I found myself that when I've asked for help, the times that I've needed it most, have been the opportunities for me to learn and grow the most, because I've actually gone into myself in ways that I would never have kind of thought of before. I would have seen it as a weakness before, whereas now I see it as an absolute sign of bravery to go and say, I need help, please, can you help me? And I think that's what I see is what you brought out in Rona, and potentially all those people that you worked with, is that you've helped them realize their potential in ways that they may not have realized before or seen themselves before. So credit to you. With Another Way Now, what's next for that? Or are you looking to expand that across the globe? Or is it a case of, are you looking to maintain that within the UK? Because I'm sure there's people listening who would potentially love to try and get involved, or to help, or to bring the story to all areas of the world, you know, because it's incredible what you guys are doing.
Well, we did start out, we've shown our films in Australia, in Sydney, and at an organisation called Busboys and Poets in Washington. And it was lovely doing something international, but we don't make money. So it was funded at that time by Another Way Associates, the corporate arm, which is now winding down.
Okay.
And which is why we're registering as a charity, because we can't afford to keep funding it. We need to fundraise for it. The second thing was, because we've got such a tight little team, there's just 3 of us really, you know, plus other people who join us for particular projects. It meant that we would have all 3 of us flying out to Washington, or I would fly out to Sydney, and you know, the cost of doing things abroad, we're not fundraising, is just too high. We haven't got the luxury of money in that way. Yeah. So we'll just do what we can do in the UK, and it doesn't cost us because every man doesn't charge us.
And where I suppose as well, with the facility now, with the way things are and everything moving digitally, and you can do things remotely, there may be an opportunity to create something on a remote basis that you guys can then share with the world in a remote way, which is still amazing. You know?
Which is what happened for our last film. We had people from India, from America, from Australia, all watching the film. I was in France at the time, and we had the Q&A, and we had a panel, and it was really international. People were waking up all hours of the day and night just to be there. Great.
Amazing. Yeah.
Good old COVID, eh?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that, and people have an interest, so they'll do whatever it takes to stay involved. Okay, so Tina, we're coming to the close, and I appreciate all your time. So you have a sheet of paper, and you have one message to share with the world. What would that be?
Keep learning.
Lovely, lovely. And finally, so I think throughout this conversation, we've kind of seen elements of what makes you tick. As I said at the start, you have an incredible journey, and you've done so much in your life, and you're continuing to do so. But if you were to sum up in your own words, what is it that makes you tick?
Now, this is going to sound odd, but I think it's a touch of madness. I really think that. I mean, they used to call me Mad Tina in Sheffield. I think that's what allows me to do all the different things that I do. I think there's a craziness there.
Lovely. Love it. A controlled craziness, that's for sure.
Controlled craziness, yeah. Pinned down craziness.
Well, Tina, listen, I'll put different links and information on the show notes, so that people can kind of find out a little bit more about Another Way Now, and obviously, yeah, there's always a supporter on this side of the pond. So anything that I can do to help in the future, please don't be afraid to reach out. But I really do appreciate all your time. I'm so thankful that you've taken the time to speak with us, and I've no doubt it'll help many people who are listening. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're so welcome, and thank you for asking me. I didn't know all the things I was going to say, so I've learned something about myself today.
Amazing. Listen,
That's
Tina,
great.
thank you. Thanks a million.
All right. Okay. Take care, Stephen.
See ya.
Bye.